Hi everyone, my name is Jane and today we're going to paint a simple impressionistic springtime beach. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials and let's get started. Let's get started painting in our sky and our water, and I'm going to use my 1-inch flat brush, just wet it really good in my jar and wipe a little extra off on the edge. Now I have titanium white, phthalo blue, and ultramarine blue, and I know the ultramarine and the phthalo don't look very different on the plate, so I've marked them up on my plate here so that you can tell the difference. So U is for ultramarine, P is for phthalo. I'm going to load up with white, and remember when we load up, we squish the brush in the paint because that helps draw it into the bristles, kind of like a sponge, so we can get a good amount of coverage. Now I'm just going to come in and grab a little corner of phthalo blue, not a ton of paint. I want a very soft, subtle sky. I'm just start laying that down. Notice I'm just kind of going back and forth. I'm not really worrying about blending the colors, just getting it on there. And once your brush is about out of paint, you can just go lightly across and barely touching the canvas, just to streak out any of the ends of the brush strokes. But I like the difference in colors there. Let's load up again, do a little more phthalo blue. The same thing, just kind of back and forth. It's almost like a long, lazy X. See that? If you get a spot that's too dark, just grab a little bit more white and you can take that back a bit. Soft all the way across to get rid of the brush strokes. And I'm going to grab a little bit of ultramarine now down here for the bottom area. And you're going to see a huge difference in these two colors. See that the ultramarine almost looks purple next to that phthalo blue. And that's because the phthalo blue is a green-based blue and the ultramarine is a red-based blue. So the ultramarine is going to look a little more like a shadow color. Super light pressure to just drag that across. And the ultramarine and the phthalo blue don't have to be completely separate. I'm going to grab just a little corner of each this time. Now let's do our water. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of white. I've still got the blues on here. And I'm going to hold my brush like this and put the edge right where I want my horizon to be and just drag straight across. You don't have to go all the way across because we're going to put some land over here. So I just kind of stopped there and now I can go flat and start smoothing that. I do want my water to appear flat, so I'm just going straight back and forth. A little bit more white, a little bit of ultramarine, and the same thing, just straight back and forth. And as I come down, I'm going to grab some phthalo blue. So we're kind of doing the opposite of what's in the sky. If we have the phthalo blue at the top in the sky, we're going to have the phthalo blue at the bottom in the water. Now before this dries all the way, I'm going to take my number 12 cloud brush, and this brush is dry, and we're going to scrub in some very simple clouds. And I'm just picking up a tiny bit of white, see, not very much white at all. And I'm just going to decide where I want some clouds and just lightly start scrubbing it in. Now because my background is still wet, I'm picking up some of that color, and that's helping me get a really soft look here. And that's the combination of the blending of the color and the fact that I'm not using much paint. And I'm varying up the way I scrub. Sometimes I'm twisting it like that. Sometimes I'm just kind of scrubbing it side to side. You're not going for real distinct clouds here just yet. We'll add some highlights and make them a little bit more obvious in a minute. But even then, I still want these to be pretty much insinuated clouds. I'm going to make sure that I get a little bit of cloud over top of where I have this darker blue because that'll seem like a little bit of a shadow underneath the clouds. So I'm not covering it, but I've got clouds right above it. And then just lightly blending into the bottom edge. All right, now we're gonna go down to this 1/4 inch flat brush, and I've wet it in my jar. And I have Dioxazine Purple, Yellow Oxide, and Cadmium Yellow Deep Hue. And we are gonna mix the purple and the yellow to get a dark brown color. So we're gonna start with the ground in the distance. I'm gonna pull a little bit of this Yellow Oxide out and a little bit of the Dioxazine Purple and mix the two together until I get kind of a brownish color. Keep it as dark as you can, and maybe throw a little bit of that cadmium yellow in there too. And there we've got a nice brown. So I'm going to use my brush flat, decide about where I want the end of my land to be, right on the horizon. And with very light pressure, I've got my hand braced on my canvas here. I'm just going to start there and get a little bit of a line right on my horizon. And drag that over. And as I get over toward the edge of my canvas, I can put a little more pressure on it to get some higher hills throughout here. I just kind of turned my brush flat as I went. Just make sure to keep this bottom edge relatively flat. We're going to add some more to that, so it doesn't have to be perfect, but keep it as flat as possible. I'm going to throw a little bit more of my yellows into that mixture. And just start blending it down. This part doesn't matter so much what your colors look like because we're going to add all kinds of shadows and highlights to it. Let's come around here, just with the very tip of the brush, and kind of start scratching out banks of our land. Just give ourselves an idea of where that is. And then fill all of that in. As I bring it down, I may grab a little bit of white and mix it in there, just to remind myself that I'm going to have the ground get a little bit lighter as it moves toward me. But that's all that is just as a reminder. You could just paint this all in a solid color, it doesn't matter. So we're going to go for kind of an impressionist type thing here, so don't get too hung up on details. Just focus on your colors. You know, we're going to play with light and shadow a little bit in here, and really we're going to do that through color placement. All right, now my clouds are pretty much dry. They're still just a little bit tacky, but that's all right. And I'm going to go to my number 6 cloud brush, and I'm just going to pick up just a little bit of white on the end of my brush. And this brush is also dry. Now all I'm going to do, I'm not really going to create any cloud shapes, and notice how that paint is just on the end. I'm going to put my brush kind of flat so it pushes that paint to the end of the brush, to the tip, and I'm just going to kind of give a few little highlights, just really subtle in here, just wherever you feel like you need them. Remember, with clouds, if you think you have enough paint on your brush, you probably have too much. So just use a little tiny bit. You can always get more. But if you get too much, then you're going to have a hard time getting the look that you want. And remember, your highlights aren't just on the edges of the clouds. You can have a highlight here in the middle. You can have something that's not even really a highlight, it's just kind of a poof like that kind of scoots away from the cloud. But see how I'm laying my brush flat? So you can think of it like a foot. If you think of your brush like a foot, no matter what brush you're using if you're doing this, think of it like a foot and you want to stand flat-footed, right? And when we're just pushing highlights into the edges of the clouds, think about standing on your foot with your weight just slightly rocked towards your toes. And that's what we're doing here. We're putting the pressure, even though the brush is flat, the pressure is really right at the tip of the bristles. Just to get those nice soft edges. It's keeping the brush pushed flat like that that makes sure that we don't have a hard line down inside of our cloud. Because notice I was only picking up paint on the edge, but see how far down the paint has come? So when I'm pushing like that, it's this part in the center of the bristles that's scrubbing it so that it's nice and soft right in here. Make sure you stand back and look at your work every once in a while. Don't judge it while you're standing right in front of it. Get a few feet away from it and look at it and judge it from there. Now in our water here, we're actually going to do something very similar. I'm loading up my brush just like I did, just with the tiniest bit of paint right on the edge. And I'm going to come in here, push my brush almost flat. We're kind of standing on our tiptoes here. And just lightly scrub it back and forth. Make sure you keep that bottom edge completely faded out. And keep your brush strokes horizontal. Maybe it'll look a little bit like some distant waves crashing or something. If you get something that's just a little too much, maybe you had too much paint on there like I just did, just pick up a little more of your blue mixture. And very lightly just scrub over the edge of that. And I think I'm actually going to go to my flat brush. A little bit of that phthalo blue white mixture. And just side to side, get rid of that I put at the bottom there that was just a little too much. I just picked up a little bit of white there. And just kind of almost like sketching. I'm just kind of scooting it, using the paintbrush just like a pencil, really. Just kind of scoot it around here, insinuate a little bit of motion in the water. You can do this with the lighter colors while you're in the darker colors, and you can do it with the darker colors while you're in the lighter colors. So I did that there with almost pure ultramarine. And then I'm just picking up some white and I'm going to kind of scoot in the same kind of area. Over top of it a little bit, around it. I'm just going to get some pure white and just give a couple of little scrapes back through here. Super light pressure. My brush really isn't even touching the canvas. It's mostly just the paint on my brush that's touching the canvas. And notice my hand is planted on my canvas. Just like you would if you were sketching on a piece of paper, you wouldn't have your hand hovering way up above the table. You would have your hand on your paper. And you can barely see those, but it's just enough to give your eye the idea that there's movement back there. Let's go ahead and grab some of our Phthalo blue and kind of do the same thing in through here. So can you see these little sketchy shapes that I'm making? There's not really a defined shape. They're not lines that go from one side to the other. They're just kind of little scratches that zigzag around. Get a little bit of white on there. And then the same thing around those, kind of crossing them, going over them, sitting under them. Helps to blend them back a little bit. And even add a little bit of a lighter color for that interest again. And I'm not keeping it separate from the ultramarine area. I just took that little bit of white right up into the ultramarine. Just like there, right up into it. Don't keep them separate, because if you look out at the water, you don't see necessarily hard lines where two different colors meet. I'm just going to do a little bit more white right here where it's closer to us. You know, after I stood back and looked at this, I felt like I had just a little too much of a line in my color here with the ultramarine. So I just picked up a little bit of white on my brush and then just kind of wiped it off, so I don't have very much paint on here. And I'm gonna just lightly kind of smooth, almost at an angle. I've got my brush, I'm using it flat, but almost at an angle. And I'm just lightly smearing some of that white on my brush over top of that, just to soften it. So if you end up with a little bit too much of a line that you don't like, you can take it back. Just mix up a little bit of your other color and use super light pressure to go over it. All right, now we're gonna add some distant trees here. And I'm still using my little 1/4-inch flat brush. I have some quinacridone, and I'm gonna grab some white and mix it over here off to the side. Get a nice light color. Nice light pink. Then we're gonna come into here and we're gonna make little dashes. And every time I make a dash, I'm gonna turn my brush a little. So sometimes I'm just gonna hit it with the corner. Sometimes I'll do it flat. But it's always going to be just a little bit different. Let it overlap your horizon a bit. The top shape doesn't matter too much because we're going to add some taller trees there. But these are really distant, so they don't have a lot of shape or even color variation. And notice that as I get farther this way, they're gonna get a little bit smaller. I'm touching the canvas a lot lighter here to get smaller trees. I'm just gonna let that go until the color is pretty much gone from my brush, or until they get so small that it's not even worth trying to put them there. So I think that's about good. We didn't go all the way to the edge. Now I'm gonna pull some more quinacridone into that and get a darker color. Still has some white in there, so it's still not solid quinacridone. And I'm gonna do the same thing here, but lower. So these are maybe just a little bit closer. And that first layer of pink is still a little bit wet, so I am picking up a bit of it as I go over top, which is giving these trees just a little bit more detail than the other ones, because it's got a bit of a streaked effect into it. But still doing the same thing, kind of using the corner, using it flat, turning it every so often so that I get a different look each time my brush touches the canvas. And we'll let those trail out too. Maybe we won't take it over quite as far. I'll add a couple in here that are just a little bit darker. It was a little lighter right here than I wanted. Now I'm going to take my purple and just a little bit of the yellow oxide. I just don't want a solid bright purple. So see, it's still purple. It's just a little more drab than the Diox on its own. And I'm going to come into this little quinacridone white mixture and mix it in there a bit. Because the farther something away from you is, the more washed out the colors may seem. So I want these trees to appear purple, but if I just put the bright, bold Diox purple on them, it's going to be just a little bit more purple than what I want. Okay, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to go up above these lighter trees, a little bit bigger brush strokes. I'm going to come down over top of them just a little bit. Make sure that you leave a little bit of your sky poking through. Can you see that little spot there? Because a tree isn't going to be just a solid blob. You're going to have some breaks in it here and there where you can see the sky. A little purple yellow, mix it in there. So I'm almost getting like a dark mauve color. They're not touching the hillside right here. They're a little bit taller trees. All right, now I'm gonna come into my purple and my yellow. I haven't cleaned off my brush. That's one of the things I like about painting kind of impressionistically is I like to just be able to go straight to the next color without washing off my brush if I can help it. So I'm mixing up some more of that purple yellow color. And from the ground here, I'm gonna use the edge of my brush and super light pressure. Notice I don't know if you can tell, I've got my pinky on my canvas to kind of help steady my hand so I don't put too much pressure. And I'm just gonna lightly drag up and into this purple. Just insinuate some branches there. You don't have to get too crazy with tree trunks and branches and all those details. Just kind of insinuate that they're in there. Maybe there's even some that don't really go anywhere. Try and space them out at odd intervals so they're not all exactly the same. Some of these you can't really see real well. Some of them you can see really well. It just is going to help give the impression that this is a dense forest full of these little trees back here. As we get farther this way, I'm putting less and less attention into them. You see some of them are just barely little dashes. So putting that dark color on top of the lighter color and then insinuating some tree trunks helps push those first trees into the distance and pull those purple ones a little bit closer to us. Okay, I did clean off my brush and we're gonna start highlighting and putting shadows into our ground. And this is actually where we're gonna spend the majority of our time in this painting. So let's start with some shadow, some yellow and some purple, a little heavier on the purple than on the yellow so that it's quite dark. We're going to come in here and just go sideways. We can cut off the bottom of those trees. That also will help say that they're in the distance. And I'm just using very light, very small brush strokes to start creating our ground. And maybe we'll even go a little bit lighter, just pick up a little more yellow there. Now, as you're working on your ground, I don't want you to be too overly concerned with blending colors together, because that's going to help you get a nice kind of shadow sun dappled effect. What I want you to concentrate on is creating movement in your ground with the direction of the brush strokes and using the color to say this is in shadow, this is in highlight. Let's start adding just a little bit of a highlight to the beach area in the distance. So see, I still have a little bit of that purple on here, but I mixed in quite a bit of my gold. I'm actually going to take just a little corner of white, get a little bit of a lighter color. Start right at my beach. See how I'm just touching the edge of the brush to the canvas and then lightly just kind of streaking it. And again, my hand is resting on my canvas. We're just going to focus on the beach area here right now. Now here's something you can do if you want to make it seem like the beach here is curving down toward the water, then your brush stroke would kind of go up and over. If you want it to seem like it's sloping from the water up, then your brush stroke would be flat and up on the end there. I'm going to make it look like it's swooping up. Let's get a little of this brighter yellow in there, maybe a tiny bit more white. Nice light color. So I'm going to start from here and I'm going to pull it straight, just horizontal. And as I move this way, I'm going to start coming up a little bit. So that's going to tell you that the sand is sloping down toward the water. Every time I go back for more paint, I'm picking up a little bit of a different color. You can go lighter, you can go darker, more purple, more yellow, whatever you want to do. See, they're always just really short little brush strokes, about a ½ an inch or so. As I come forward, I can make them a little bit longer. That's also going to help it seem like it's closer to us. Let's get a little brighter yellow in there. See how I'm taking that right into the water? I don't have a hard line right where the beach meets the water. Let's even go lighter there, maybe a little brighter, more white and more of this bright yellow. All right, so I realize now that you couldn't see what I was doing down here too well. I just got a new camera, and so now I have 3 cameras. The point of that was to try and make sure that you could always see what I was doing, but now I have to try and remember to take care of 3 cameras. So let's start working on this area here. I've got my darker color. It's mostly purple, but with some of the yellows and even a little white in it. And we're gonna do the same thing. These are all gonna be pretty much horizontal, but you can insinuate different areas in your ground by making some of them go down this way or down this way, and that's gonna give you kind of a rugged ground feel. So I'm just gonna start laying in some of this dark color back here. I'm not filling in all of the area. If you can tell, you can still see my underpainting that I did. Just lightly kind of dashing this on here and there. Maybe I will have an area that kind of moves down right here. And we'll mix in a little more yellow as I move closer. Don't worry about where it's going to connect here just yet. Actually, I'm going to take that lighter color because it was quite a bit lighter, and I'm going to go in between that purple that I just did to cover my underpainting. See, and that's quite a bit brighter than the rest of it, but I'm just gonna let that be there. That's all right. Take it right over top of that purple a little bit. Don't try and keep them perfectly separate. And maybe right there where it meets that swoop down, I kind of took it out and then swoop it down into there a little. I'm going to mix a little white into there because that area is quite a bit lighter. I love painting super messy and never cleaning off my brush. It's very freeing for me to paint that way. I know some of you just can't stand that. Some people are just much tidier painters. See, just lightly swooping it down into there. You can blend it with your finger a little if you need to. Now right here, I know is where I want the base of my trees, my main trees. So I'm just going to wipe some of that off and grab a dark color. It's mostly purple with just a hint of the yellow in it. And I'm going to draw kind of an outcrop. So it's going to come out and down, swoop, and over here, about like that. And then we'll blend it in with our beach area right here. Just kind of swoop that down. I want you to feel really free to play with the different colors. Find out what they do when you use them together. Find out how you create movement by using different brush strokes or different colors. Don't try to micromanage your colors and what they're doing. You know, if you decide, oh, I want it brighter right there, try out a bright yellow like I just did. If you don't like it, you can cover it up later, but I'm going to leave that there for now. I don't know if I like that right there or not. But I know right in here, I want quite a bit of shadow. However, what I'm going to do first is lay in my brighter color, my sun, where the sun is coming through, and throwing bright patches on the ground. So I'm just going to lay in a few of those here and there. Wipe a lot of that off, get some more purple. And let's add our shadows in. Just super light pressure, especially where you're going over any paint that you just laid down because it's still wet. So if you go over it with super light pressure, then you'll get a nice, soft, very subtle blend. See how I'm just lightly dusting over that bright yellow. Just barely dusting it. And if that yellow is perfectly dry by the time you get to it, then when you want to blend in with it, just grab a little bit of your lighter color, like that. And see how that blends it in there? And I'm just going back and forth between all my different colors. Just don't overwork it and get everything to just blend together so it's one solid color. Let these colors be a little separate and just kind of play together in interesting ways. I know right now it looks weird, but I promise that once we get our trees on here especially, your brain is going to interpret it as shadow and light. Just remember to kind of bridge the gap between your light and your dark with something in the middle. So I'm using mostly my cad yellow for the bright highlights and mostly purple with a little bit of the yellow oxide for the shadows. And then in between, I'm just grabbing a little bit of yellow oxide, just the tiniest bit on the tip of my brush, and just lightly dusting over that connect. But all of these colors are quite transparent, so as they dry, you'll be able to see the other layers between them. So you'll get a really dynamic ground that looks like, you know, it's covered in grasses or leaves or something. Or maybe it's just sand. But this yellow, or the cadmium yellow especially, is very, very transparent. So if you lay it down directly over top of the purple, once it dries, it's going to be so transparent and that purple will still show through there. Just help give a nice dynamic feel to the ground. And if you don't like something, you just take it away. Put a darker color over it or a lighter color over it. But at no point should you stop doing this ground because you don't like it and just deal with it and just leave it. If you don't like it, just let it dry and keep going over it. There's no end to the number of times you can go over this. But don't fight with something while it's wet, because then you just kind of smear it around and blend it in more. If you really are struggling with something, let it dry and then come back to it. Just a little bit of a brighter color here toward the edge of the beach. Now all of this paint is dry, so I'm not really blending, I'm just kind of scooting over the top of it. And I'm barely touching the canvas. Can you see that? Just barely touching. You can even throw in little unexpected shadows here and there. Just a little bit of a darker color there. Maybe there's a little depression in the sand. Let's play up here for a minute. So I cleaned off my brush, and I'm going to take the tiniest speck of titanium white, just on the corner, and mix it in with my quinacridone. Get a nice bright pink color, but not too much paint, so I'm kind of wiping it off a little. Maybe I want just a little more than that. And I'm going to use the edge of my brush and do pretty much the same thing, very similar. Just lightly scoot it here and there, because we're going to have some little flowers and stuff growing in our ground. Sometimes when I pick up the pink color, it's a little brighter than other times. Sometimes it's a little darker. And again, I'm not filling in everything. I'm just making little dashes to give a bit of that color in here. And if you really want to, you can grab a little bit of that purple and mix it in there too. Let's throw a little more purple in there. I'm not going to bring it all the way down, just a bit here in the back. Clean off my brush, and I'm going to get some white and mix it with my cadmium yellow. Get a nice bright yellow. We're going to do a very similar thing to what we just did with the pink and the purple. We're just going to scoot a little bit of this yellow in there, because we'll have some yellow flowers up front too. Maybe right here I'll just kind of flick up just a little. That's getting a little bit closer to us. I think I'll do that with my quinacridone. Just a little tiny bit, and just lightly flick upwards. These little brush strokes that I'm doing are about 1 millimeter high. They're very tiny. I have almost no paint. I think that's probably good. All right, now I have my little piece of chalk, and you probably won't be able to see this too well, but we're just gonna kind of draw in where we want our trees. So I'm gonna start from this little mound here and just kind of draw a line up. Maybe another one off the side of it here. We'll have a larger one here that's closer to us, so we're gonna start it a little lower in the ground. Not a lot lower, just a little bit. And he's gonna come up like that. Now I've got my 1/2 inch angle brush that I wet in my jar, and I'm gonna mix up that yellow purple mixture again. Mix up quite a bit, because you wanna lay this on fairly thick. I'm gonna start up here, brace my hand on my canvas, and just use the edge of the brush to say where that tree is. We'll fatten it out in a minute. And our next one. All right, let's start with this one, and I'm gonna start at the top here again and put a little extra pressure on my brush as I come down to widen it out. You don't have to worry too much about what it looks like at the bottom here just yet. This one is going to be quite fat. So I'm putting a good amount of pressure there to really widen it out. And I can even lay my brush flat afterwards. All right, let's add some highlights to our tree. And I'm going to take that same purple color and mix it in with some gold, get a much lighter version of it. And all I'm going to do is come in here with the edge of my brush and just lightly kind of swipe. And a little bit of an arced shape, so it's kind of like that, just a little bit like that. I'm not going all the way to the back, but I needed just a little extra water on my brush. So just kind of back. It doesn't have to cover the entire tree. It's just going to give it a look of some bark that's highlighted a little bit. And take that all the way down the edge of all 3 trees. I used my yellow oxide here to make this brownish color, but you could use the cadmium yellow if you like. It doesn't really matter. I'm still using my 1/4 inch brush, but if you want to use a larger brush for this part, that's okay too. I'm going to just pick up some of my Dioxazine Purple. Quite a bit of it. It's a little bit blobbed onto my brush. And we're going to do something very similar to what we did to these little trees down here, which is these little kind of back and forth dashes. Notice my brush changes position every time it touches. All of them kind of overlap. But I'm leaving some of the sky poking through too. Don't try and cover all of the sky. You want it to be pretty heavy toward the top. And then as we come down, it can start to thin out a little bit. But let's just worry about laying in this top area first. Some of it can go over your trunks. Some of it can stop at the trunk like it's behind it. Whatever you want to do. Take it all the way to the edge of your canvas. Don't be afraid. Let it go off of the edge. That's going to help indicate that the tree continues beyond what we can see. Don't try and keep it squished within the front part of the canvas. I'm going to start bringing a little branch kind of down and across the front of the tree there. Pretty heavy right in here where these 2 trees are overlapping. We're going to bring it out quite far over here. And let's start bringing some of our branches down. I don't want them just kind of hanging down. I'm going to kind of have them coming out and moving. Maybe they're blowing in the wind a little bit, or it's just a really fancy tree that kind of swoops in different directions. Now what I'm going to do is use just the corner of my angle brush, and we're going to add some little detail leaves because I don't want everything to seem really big. So in some of these big areas, see how I just came up and added just a couple little spots. Let me zoom you in there a little bit more so you can see what I'm talking about. So just the corner, and I'm going to kind of break up some of these lines with some little ones. Not filling in all of the spots with them, just adding some little trailing off small ones here and there. just to keep it kind of interesting. We're not drawing polka dots here, so don't just make some random dots that don't look like they're part of the tree. It's got to kind of move in the same direction as everything. It's just going to accent the shape and the movement of the tree. All right, now some quinacridone, and my purple is still wet. If your purple is no longer wet, then mix a little of your quinacridone with some purple before you go to it, because since my purple's still wet, when I start adding this color, it's gonna pick up a little bit of it. I'm gonna do a very similar thing in the same kind of shapes and directions. It doesn't have to be all right on top of the purple. You can leave some of the purple without the quinacridone on it. You can take the quinacridone outside of it a little bit. And notice I didn't start the quinacridone clear up in here. I want to leave that pretty dark so it feels like it's in shadow. I'm just lightly taking it back just a little bit so it kind of fades out. And still adding those little tiny spots toward the end of the branches. Up through here, I'm going to add more because this part of the tree is taking direct sunlight. And we're going to add some of the quinacridone with some white to get a nice bright pink too. So we'll get much more highlights going on in here. Notice I'm kind of keeping it toward this top edge of my branches and letting the lower side and the ones to the right of the canvas be a little bit darker. That's going to help us with our light source because that's kind of what we did on the ground. We have the hillside being highlighted, and on the tree trunks we added the highlight on this left side. I'm just picking up a little more of my Diox. And in some of these parts where I feel like my quinacridone was too intense, I'm just taking it right over top of the edge on the inside. And it's kind of blending it back just a little bit. See, just like right there. I'm not covering it completely, I'm just almost like putting some more darker foliage over top of it. But because that quinacridone is still wet, it's really blending and it's giving me a really nice effect that I like. You can even take it a little bit heavier up in through here if you feel like it's too light of a purple. Because the purple's so transparent, I think I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna take some more through here and darken it a bit. Okay, I've cleaned off my brush. I'm gonna get some white and start mixing up a lighter color. And again, all of my other colors on my tree are still wet, so I'll get a little bit of mixing in here, and that's exactly what I want. Now, this color that I lay down, I'm only gonna apply it really with the corner of my brush. So those little spots we did on the end, that's really about all I'm gonna do through here. Kind of break it up. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. They really only exist on the quinacridone part. just kind of dotting, dragging it a little bit when I touch the paintbrush to the canvas. But it's pretty much just like a dot, just like that, with a little bit of a pull. I'm going to pick up just a corner of straight quinacridone there because I feel like that's too hard of a transition in right there. Much better. Lots of little dots. I guess this is kind of a painting where you find your little zen space. Just get lost in painting these little dots. And right up in here where it's taking a little bit more of the sunlight, we're going to add just a few extra ones. Make it just a little brighter than some of the other areas. So I'm putting just a bit more pressure on my brush here. And let's go even lighter. I'm just going to take the paint that I have on my brush and mix it in with my white. Quite a bit of white. I want a color that is very, very light. Much, much lighter than what we just used. But notice every color that's lighter, we add just a little less of it. I'm not even really putting this highlight color on everything. Toward the front, I pretty much did, but back here, maybe just a few spots here and there. Cleaned off my brush, more quinacridone. I'm actually gonna bring, just a little bit of this. It seemed like there's kind of a branch overhanging. I'm not covering all of that purple, just taking a couple of areas and saying that there's a branch there. And I like that much better. The original image that inspired this, it's just dark inside, and I really liked the way that it looked. But sometimes, we all work a little different, and sometimes the way we work may not translate well to achieving something specific that you see. So you just have to find what works for you. You don't like the way something looks in an image you're working from, then change it. You have the right to do that. My paint is quite thick here. I'm almost getting an impasto effect. Let's give our tree trunks some highlights, kind of like we did on the ground. So I'm mixing my two yellows. Wipe off a bit of it, a little bit of white, just to brighten it. And we're gonna come in here and just kind of dust some little streaks in there. Light pressure, just the way we did it on the ground. And each streak can be shaped a little bit different because it's light that's shining through the branches. So it might not have a real regular shape. All right, last part and we're about done. Let's get some of our kind of yellowish brown color here. And we'll just add like some little grasses at the base of our trees. Just kind of flicking up over the bottom of it. Get rid of that chalk line. Up here on the hill, it's a little darker, so I'm gonna mix some more purple in there. Whoa, how'd that happen? Oh well. That little piece of grass is sun-dappled as well. And let's keep that going. We don't need to do this everywhere, but see, I'm just adding some very small, kind of insinuated grasses. Take a cue from where you're adding them. If it's a light colored spot, mix up a little bit of a lighter color. If it's a darker spot, get your darker color. And it doesn't have to cover the whole thing, just here and there. See, just some really simple light grasses. We're really just kind of breaking up that shape, which is insinuating that there's grasses there. And I'm going to take that along the edge here just a little bit. Okay, we're almost done. Just load up with some quinacridone. I'm just gonna use the corner of my flat brush and just kind of start dotting some little flowers on. Just change your color whenever you like, add a little white. Maybe even a hint of purple. Maybe these are flowers, maybe they're leaves that have fallen off of our trees. I'm pushing a little harder there to get some larger flowers. And I like, if you notice, I just kind of wiped my brush off on the plate and then loaded up with white. And then when I touch here, if you can see, it almost looks like a flower that has different colors on the inside, just because my brush wasn't clean. And maybe some yellow flowers, and then we'll call it done. And there's your Impressionist Springtime Beach painting. I hope you learned a little bit about color mixing and painting a little bit more loose with this one. Don't forget to check out the video description below for links to where you can find me all over the internet so that you can share your painting with me. If you haven't yet already, make sure that you subscribe by clicking here. If you've already subscribed, make sure you hit the little bell sign so that you can get a notification when I upload a new video each week. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.